Now I'm going to have to look a little bit through this plant, but this is my Spathiphyllum, and this is a variegated version of Spathiphyllum. Now, I hadn't been growing Spathiphyllum for a while. It was just kind of one of those ones where as you start to get a little bit more interesting and rare plants, they just kind of, the more common ones slowly get kind of pushed out from the mix. But I got a Spathiphyllum for all of you because this is, I think it's an important one to be able to highlight. And I did do a Spathiphyllum silver streak way back in 365 Days of Plants, but that one's a little bit harder to get your hands on. It's also a bit more temperamental, and I think that the old faithful of Spathiphyllum, or otherwise known as peace lily, is a good one to be able to highlight. And I do have a tendency to love the variegated version because it has this kind of like grayish flecking throughout, and I think that is just really beautiful. And it's one of those ever bloomers, so I'm going to show you a little bit more of what the spadix and spathe looks like. It is an aroid and probably one of the more common ones, and you'll notice that sometimes this actually gets a little bit greener. I've had a lot of questions about that. Why is that getting green? Well, sometimes, and you might notice this also with anthuriums, that will become greener largely because it's pumping a little bit more chlorophyll into it. So it's preparing a bit more for its dormancy or kind of a winter season where it's starting to put a little bit more chlorophyll up into its floral parts in order to act a little bit more like a leaf in order to be able to pull some of the waning sunlight hours into it for nourishment. So that is just totally normal. If you want to see when it starts to get white again, then it'll, by providing it probably a little bit more light, then it'll probably start to whiten up. Now, this is a plant, and if you've had it in your collection, you will know this is a diva plant because it tells you when it needs water. And this is a plant that almost constantly needs a little bit of moisture, or else it starts to, just kind of go droopy-leaved on you. So this is one that I would oftentimes give a hydrospike to, or a couple hydrospikes. If you don't know what they are, I will link them down in the description. And I also have a very vintage video of Plant Went On Me back in the day of like some watering hacks, and I highlight them there. And I also highlight it throughout my Houseplant Masterclass. So those are things that you could actually look into and research beyond the spath. But the spath and a lot of my ferns, I like to actually hydrospike them. Just because if you are sometimes forgetful of watering and you're not paying attention to them, all of a sudden their leaves will be kind of drooped to the floor. But otherwise, this will put out a lot of foliage and will put out quite a bit of its inflorescences. So you do want to give it more of a biweekly fertilizer. I would say, doing something like a well-balanced fertilizer, like a 10-10-10 or a 1-1-1. If you're going the organic route for the latter, that's absolutely fine. And I didn't say where this is originally from, but it is initially from Colombia and Venezuela. However, most of the ones that you see nowadays, it's so hard to actually track the parentage because there's so many different types of cultivars of Spathiphyllum. I would say, I might even be misspeaking, but it could be like 100 different types of cultivars, if not more. They all kind of look, I think, generally like one another, and they are primarily grown through tissue culture. Which I do talk a little bit about on one of my channels. I think I was showcasing some of the anthurium and orchids from tissue culture back in the Netherlands, although I didn't take you through the TC or the tissue culture process. But this is a plant that is heavily grown through tissue culture and looks very uniform. So when you go into a plant shop or you go into a garden center, you'll see like a sea of spath, and they'll all kind of look the same, and you could probably say like, oh, okay, that was definitely grown by tissue culture methods and sent out to a bunch of grow houses in order to be able to grow it out in like the most perfect way. So giving this plant a little bit more humidity, I should say you could probably reduce your water usage in giving this water. And you could see that as far as soil, I just have a regular potting medium. Most of my potting mediums I have started to amend a little bit more with perlite. So you'll see that this is a bit more of it has some perlite in it. But because it's so needy when it comes to water, you might not even want to put the perlite in it. And you might want to give it something like a glazed ceramic pot or a plastic pot, because a terracotta will kind of like wick away that moisture. And if you're somebody who's not constantly watering, then giving it a little bit more of a plastic or glazed ceramic pot to keep that water in is going to be probably good for you. Pests, this is a very resilient plant as far as pests go. So I haven't had any kind of pest pressures whatsoever with it. But otherwise, beautiful creature. And if you can get your hands on the variegated one, then I would recommend it.